Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wellness Wednesdays with Stephanie. I am Stephanie Buckland, your host, and I am super excited finally getting to interview my friend and colleague, Kaleigh. Kaleigh, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor, complete honor.
So, Kaleigh, can you give our audience a little introduction? Who are you? What do you do? What kind of magic shows up as a result?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Kaleigh Williams. Professionally, I am an organizational development specialist, which is a fancy title for saying that I teach businesses to do business better. So anything in the human life cycle, anything human in organizations is my superpower. With that, I'm also a spiritual healer. So I am Reiki certified. I've done some work in psychic mediumship. So I consider myself sort of a crossover being. I'm very rooted in business operations, understanding fundamentals, building small to medium sized businesses. But there's also a big part of me that's very spiritual and understanding that healing the humans inside organizations is the biggest priority. So I've made it my life's mission, partially working in HR, partially working in operations, partially being a Reiki practitioner on the side. I'm also a trauma informed yoga instructor as well. So when you kind of combined all that together, the magic is truly enabling humans to thrive exactly where they are. So I teach
Mhm.
people how to bloom, like how to ground from exactly where they are and bloom from that space. There's a lot of belief in businesses and even just in society that I can't have a voice until I have a specific title. I can't have a voice until I've earned X amount of dollars. And the reality is that you can bloom from anywhere. There's dirt everywhere. Dirt is abundant. So plant yourself where it feels the most authentic and bloom from that space. And that is truly where I see magic happen in small to medium sized businesses is when they finally decide to plant themselves in their most authentic being and then actually bloom from that space. It's radical.
Beautiful.
So,
That's beautiful. Well, and that's so relevant to what we're talking about today with
mhm.
authentic leadership because it just feels very very relevant to today's society. It's almost like this awakening that's happening in the world is also happening in businesses and in business owners and the individuals, the CEOs that are like, oh my God, I have psychic abilities. Oh my God, I'm more intuitive than I thought. Oh my God, I can hear my assistants thoughts. Why am I, like
Yeah.
people are waking the fuck up. This is amazing stuff. So that is, I think, the reason that there's so much call for authenticity because people want to be real. They don't want to be stuck in their plastic houses and in their fake masks that they wear every day. They want to be real. And so the call for authenticity is like really loud right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about diving into this conversation
I know.
because
It's a
it's
powerful
so,
one.
so, so important. So what we're talking about today is authentic leadership and how it connects to our holistic wellness as entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship uh, is not for the weak.
Right? It's not for the faint of heart. Yeah. It sounds better when you say that with a British accent. Oh, yeah.
I agree. So let's start with what does authenticity mean to you as a leader?
Oh, this is a good one for me. So I spent a good portion of my career not being authentic. And I think that I had to have that, right? You have to have dark to see the light. And
Sure,
that's
happens to the best of us.
exactly. So a good portion of my career. So I grew up in entrepreneurial family. My parents worked full time. They always had side hustles. So I grew up speaking business. It was just the very transactional nature that was my home life. And I didn't love the family business at the time. My mom has been doing curriculum development, leadership development, learning and development work for a good portion of her life. She did it within companies and then subsequently turned it into her own practice in like 2010. My father was in satellite business. He built literally everything. So it was like he was always in construction, but then we also had a party rental company, right? So it was like these wildly different facets of my life. I did everything in my power, Stephanie, to avoid the family business, which when you talk to most kids that grow up in entrepreneurial families, it either like swallows them up and it's just a part of their identity, or there's those of us who become like outsiders that are like, we're never going back. And so it turns out really kind of funny. So I jumped ship. I got my first job at 18 at Western International University, and I was like stepped into the corporate life from as a high school kid, like literally graduated at 17, had to turn 18 to take the job. And
Wow.
I think that swallowed me up because who I was as a high schooler, I was in dance, I was in theater, I was like all of these very expressive things. And then all of a sudden I'm boxed into this corporate culture. I'm young. There's this common belief I don't know anything because I've, never had a real job. All of these beliefs about me. And I kind of let that swallow me up for a while. Like I had this radical belief that I had to earn my place in corporate America. And
Me too.
yeah, it's really sad actually, because there's so many of these beautiful young minds that are processing the world a lot faster than people in corporate cultures, and we don't allow that. So this first job, I did an 11-week project in 7 weeks to the scope that she had asked. Did it really well. Everything was dated and time stamped as she requested. I filed it all. Subsequently got fired from that job. Yeah. So that was a wake up call for me at 18 going, oh, I think I might be too smart for corporate America. So I got to figure out a different way out. Hopped around in a couple different jobs, ended up in a small business. It was a repossession company. And that is where I learned that it was okay to be my smart, sarcastic, funny, openly expressive self. And I was like, oh, small to medium sized business is my thing. From there, I jumped into the restaurant business, also allowed me to kind of have this expansive opportunity. Hard part was transitioning back to corporate life because eventually I became an HR manager, spent half of my life in HR. So, long story short, all the way around the mulberry bush, I had to learn that my secret sauce was who I am as an individual, not the work that I produce. And I had all of these different jobs, like training me to be smaller, be less expressive, be less smart, be less this, be less, be less, be less. And I was like, but I have all of this talent. Like, why do I need to suppress that? And it took me a long time to figure out that that's actually my magic. And my magic became intimidating to people who would look at me and think, you're in your early 20s, you've had 3 jobs your whole life. How do you know more than I know? And it's like, well, there's a lot of factors that play into that because this technically isn't my first job. I haven't only had 3 jobs. I've been working in my parents' businesses since I was 11. So this is like 10 years into my career at this
Right.
point, right? So now fast forward, leave the restaurant business, join my mom in her full-time practice in 2016, got boxed in again. Right. So when we look at how spirit gives us patterns to start to recognize who we are as individuals, I was very much living my pattern. I really needed to get out of the restaurant business because I had gotten divorced at the time, but it ended up being a place where she had like 40 clients and she couldn't manage it on her own. So one, I was watching my mom sink because she was never sleeping. And 2, organizational development was always intriguing to me. So I was like, hey, let me just jump in with 2 feet. But I only got to play in her book of business. I only got to do things by her rules. These were her clients. We did it this way. And so it took me like a year to ramp up into her book of business. And then once I did that, I set some ground rules and I was like, hey, listen, I got it now. Let me run with some of these. And so she did. She actually enabled me to branch off and start managing a couple of the clients on my own. But it took advocating for myself. Like, hey, I know enough now that I think you can trust me. And I would really like you to let go of some of this low-hanging fruit that I could take off your plate. And from there, I just never stopped. And now we have a running joke because she always says that our clients like me more than her, which we're just very different. It's not whether they like me more. I'm very people-y. She's only a little people-y. And so I feel like when people need comfort in times of stress, all of that, But that is my gift. The fact that I am expressive, the fact that I am unapologetic in who I am, the fact that I'm willing to sit at the table and talk about the real shit that bothers people, the fact that I am willing to hold space for big emotions in the workplace. There's very few consultants out there that allow people to be emotional in their jobs. And it's
Yeah.
necessary, right? These
We're
emotions.
human.
Exactly. We're not robots. We were built in with these beautiful, like spirit gifted us all of this sensory in order to truly understand the vastness of our human experience. And it's so
Mhm.
downplayed in organizations. So now I truly am the people's people. That's what I look at. I go into organizations and my job is to heal people so that the cultures can heal. If we don't heal the people, we can't heal the culture.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
That speaks volumes to authenticity. It's like we need to be real with each other. And the truth of it is that if we're not acknowledging the truth, we end up hurting each other. We end up hurting ourselves in a lot of different ways.
yeah, well, and depression. Like if you look at depression, depression is the heaviness of the masks that you carry every day. Because
Hmm.
the opposite of depression is expression, right? I'm either depressed or I'm expressed, right? And so you're like, okay, what does that look like? And so
Right.
when you don't actually have the ability to express who you are through an authentic lens, now does that mean you're a stripper on the weekends and you go into work in that outfit? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, probably not. Okay, there's a level of like mutual respect and consideration that you have for the environment in which you work, but
Hmm.
there's also a form of like truth that you can be all that you are and still operate within a job.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And actually, that speaks volumes to the next question about authenticity and self-awareness, because we, as human beings, as we navigate through life, the self-awareness is really the key to opening up to our authenticity. It's like you have to know yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, self-awareness. Um, I'm trying to frame this because there's like emotional, like there's what we call EI in the business world, right? And your emotional
Sure. Oh
intelligence.
my God.
You're okay.
Sorry, little bear. Sir, I love you. Please stop working. I'm recording, little doggy.
That's so
I
funny. I
love
didn't
you.
even hear
There's a
it,
human
which is
downstairs. I know you can hear it. I know. It's okay. I promise. It's okay.
so
Mwah.
funny. Yeah.
It's gonna keep going.
I didn't even hear it. That's so funny. Yeah, so I don't know if the recording could hear it either, but that's okay.
Well, I'm the savage.
Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
sorry.
it's okay.
We'll cut that part out.
Maybe dogs barking is relevant to this conversation or is some sort of spiritual confirmation. So we'll
Could
just
be.
add that in. Yeah. Okay, so emotional intelligence. So I'm gonna pull self-awareness up to like a higher umbrella level. So
Okay.
emotional intelligence covers a lot of things. It's how we exist in relationships, it's how we self-manage. There's a lot in the science of emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
Self-awareness is a huge portion of that. Now, authenticity is harder for people because they often don't realize that they're not being authentic. They've been
Right.
in these patterns for so long
That
that
they think
they
it's real.
start to
Yeah.
believe that that's who they are. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden they get 10, 15 years into it and they're like, ew, I don't like myself. They lose their self love. They lose taking care of their bodies. They lose like all the things they used to do for their mental health. Like, I've watched this movie millions of times. Maybe that's an exacerbated data, but I've watched it enough to know that I can create a data trend over it. Um, and so it's hard when we talk about self-awareness because most people who believe they're living in their authenticity and actually aren't can't be self-aware because
Hmm.
owning self-awareness would mean I now sit in a space where I'm willing to unpack what is not truthful.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of people in the world that the story that they've built in their mind is a hell of a lot more comfortable than unpacking what is true, right?
Oh,
And
big
so
time.
they sit in trauma patterns, they repeat trauma patterns because the story that I've told myself for the last 10 years is now my comfort zone. And so I see this a lot when I work with people with trauma, especially, right? It's like the story I've told myself about a situation that I've survived is the only way I can look at that. Because if I had to self-evaluate how I behaved within that, then I would have to no longer sit in the chair of victim. I would have to sit in the chair of ownership. And when I sit in the chair of ownership, that completely changes my lane.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole nother complexity, I will say. But there's a whole idea around how do I want to say this? Becoming self-aware in baby steps, incrementally. Look at
Mm-hmm.
one thing you don't like about yourself and evaluate why it exists. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you're done with that, you either decide to keep it or you decide to let it go. But most people look at it like, oh, this giant big thing, and then it's too hard.
Right.
It's too hard. It's
Right.
overwhelming. They sit in it and they're like, oh my God, I don't know who I am and what I do. And now I'm going to go out and buy a Corvette because I'm having a midlife crisis, when really your midlife crisis is just because you're done with the bullshit. You're done carrying all the
Yeah.
masks that you don't need
Yeah.
anymore. And it's time to unpack it.
I think this also speaks to the concept of numbing out,
100.
because I think a lot of people, when they have realizations that they're not standing in their authentic state, when they're not self-aware and they start to see their demons, they want to run away from those demons. And honestly, we're socialized to believe that, we're supposed to intoxicate ourselves to deal with shit. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just, that doesn't help. It
No.
doesn't help. It
No, because
doesn't.
you still wake up sober the next day with all the demons still in your backpack.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, that beer tasted real good going down, but the next morning you got a headache and all those demons are still right in your backpack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just
And
prolonging the
with
process.
alcohol being a depressant,
Mm-hmm.
it's also going to mess with your head. So, oh
100%.
man, that's a whole other conversation.
You know, it takes 8
But
days to detox from alcohol. 8 days. 2 beers on a
8 days.
Friday. 8 days to
Yes,
detox from it.
we shouldn't
Wild.
be drinking. Alcohol is poison.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Anyway, challenges that leaders face. I
Mm-hmm.
think a big part of that is our self-awareness and realizing who we are as people, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, trying to navigate through, as an entrepreneur, getting to know myself, getting to know my truth. Who am I as a person?
Mm-hmm.
And then who am I as a leader? Are technically the same question when you really look at it, because who you can step into, the person you can step into as a leader, depends 100% on who you are and who you feel you are. I mean, these
Mm-hmm.
are the reason we face challenges. Usually it's because we're in some kind of resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, as women too, I'm just going to add the masculine, feminine energies to this conversation as well. So, yes to all of that, right? You are the same person, especially if you're a solopreneur, right? A
Mhm.
solopreneur, there's often this like, oh, I'm going to build a business. And when I build a business, I need the cookie cutter franchise version of the business I'm going to build. That doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's not a reflection of your spirit. And if you've ever worked with abundance energetically, abundance comes from the vibrational frequency that is you. And if you're not in alignment with the work that you're doing, you're naturally not going to make money because you're not vibrating in the same frequency that you're trying to align to create abundance, right? So
Right.
this is a little quantum physics lesson for all of your listeners. But majority of the business books that have been published, unless you're actually seeking female authors, are very rooted in the masculine. Men lead very cerebrally. It's all heady, it's all thinky, it's all knowledge, it's all in that very
Logic.
masculine
Yeah.
authority. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that if you're a woman trying to build a small business, that's not going to end up working for you long term. Will you have the puzzle pieces you need within your business to actually build a good business foundation? 100%. But are you going to bloom from there? No, you're not. Women lead from their heart. And I have this conversation in all the women I coach. I've had over 300 girls now go through my leadership program. And it's all about rooting you back into your heart. What is your heart telling you? What is your divine connection telling you? And how do you use that to create abundance? So the challenges I do see come from people rooting in business ideals that don't align with who they are. So that's a huge challenge. It's not authentic to you. If you believe in sustainable energy and you're selling fossil fuel, we can already see that that's out of alignment, right? But there's a lot of
Yep.
people who, what I call sell their soul for money. And when it feels out of alignment, you're lowering your vibrational frequency, and that level of success is going to end up being a lot less than you would hope because you're out of alignment with who you are as an individual.
Mhm.
And then, but I do understand that there's a level of I have to make enough money in this world to do my thing, right? Or to sustain
Mhm.
my lifestyle. So I think it's hard for most small business owners to find balance in that. How do I make enough money to sustain? And then also, how do I find stuff that aligns? The reality is, those are one and the same. People just don't give it enough time and they don't actually believe it themselves because there's a lot of noise in the surrounding individuals that we find ourselves with that are like,
Yep.
oh, you can't make money doing that. Like, I'll tell you, my cousin, amazing theater. Like, he can sing, he can dance. He's literally amazing. And his parents wanted him to go to vet tech school as a backup plan because people don't make money doing theater. And I was just like, oh, stop it. But it's like, why not let him thrive where his soul thrives? And
Yeah.
I pay a lot of money for theater tickets. I don't know about you, but that was one of those moments that I was like, I have to teach this differently. I get that
Yeah.
we want our kids to be successful and make money, but also the way that they make money can be different than the way that we perceive money. And that's
Definitely.
not their relationship with money is not ours to manage. In essence, right? It might be on some level if they struggle, whatever, but at the same time, like, why not let them try? And then if we have to pick up some of the pieces, we can, and then let's have the discussion. But let's not cash in their cards before they've even ever seen their hand.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's balance. I think you'll find balance, but I also think that stepping into who you are, that shit comes tenfold. Like as soon as you decide I'm gonna be this for the rest of my life, the universe is like, heard you, got it. Let me start front loading you with the stuff. And
Mhm.
it's miraculous. And sometimes you're like, how the fuck did that happen? And it's just because you finally told the universe what you wanted and it was very specific and they have nothing to do but respond.
Yeah. Talk about authenticity, right? So integrating holistic wellness into leadership, there's definitely something to be said for having lifestyle practices that keep us healthy and keep us grounded and keep us in alignment with our physical bodies, and everything that our bodies
Mhm.
need for maintenance. But then the mental practices, mindset practices, all the things that keep us mentally healthy, there's so many things that require our attention in order to stay in authentic awareness of what this body needs
Mhm.
in order to fully show up and be present for like this conversation. There's so much before that in preparation for it. So I would love to hear your take on this, self-care and integrating holistic wellness practices as a leader.
Yes. Essential. So part of the capitalistic American society that we live in teaches us that we need to hustle harder.
Mhm.
But that's actually counterintuitive to how our souls want to exist. Because we know our bodies need rest, we know our minds need rest, we know our spirits need rest, right? So from a mind body spirit perspective, truthfully, we have to nurture our human in order to share our gifts. And
Yes.
I think that the capitalistic mentality of everything forces us into these patterns of overworking and overserving and overdoing, which is an absence of self-love and self-care. And when you have an absence of self-love and self-care, you're naturally lowering your vibrational frequency. You're not going to attract abundance from that space. So you are
Right.
going to be in a pattern of working harder for the rest of your existence until you decide to check yourself in that. There's a quote that the Dalai Lama said a long time ago, and it's like, oh, what is it? Like a man that sacrifices his health in order to make money, then sacrifices his money to recuperate his health. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. And so that's a perfect example of how modern day America teaches us to what I call subconsciously bypass our needs.
Mhm.
So like I will, and this is like a funny example, but like how often do we sit in Zoom calls and like I have to pee so bad? And I'm like literally bypassing the sensation in my body that's like, go use the restroom to finish the conversation because I'm navigating this as being more important than actually nourishing my body. So something
Right.
as simple as that we're programmed to do from the time we're children ends up growing into, oh, I'm hungry, but I'm actually not going to eat because I don't have time to eat, right? Another
Right.
subconscious bypass. Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, but I have 7 more invoices to send. Subconscious bypass, right? So the more that we step into that subconscious bypassing, the less our subconscious starts to trust us and the more disconnected we are from ourselves. So
Yep.
truthfully, the human experience is to sit in your body, nourish your body, and from there, share your gifts. And so
Yep.
that subconscious bypassing is a program that you're going to have to recognize that you've been handed down for what 4 generations now. And in order to be the best version of myself, I'm going to have to slow down and honor my being. And then from the place of honoring my being, I can then share my gifts with the world. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I've
it's a
heard
lot.
arguments that I don't have time for self-care. And I'm like, well, honestly, if you really look at your life, if you really look at your lifestyle and your daily practices and everything you do have time. You just have to figure out where it fits.
Well, people don't see energy as a currency. That's part of the problem. Part of the problem is I just have an abundant amount of energy and I can spend it however I want. But if you turned your energy into dollars, how would you spend those? And it would probably be a hell of a lot different than you're spending your energy now. But
For
I think
sure.
we've gotten to the point where we take our energy for granted and we don't actually look at it as currency anymore. And so we just hand it out willy nilly wherever we want to, or we actually don't nourish it. And so it's like, if you had $1 million, right? Let's say my energy translates to $1 million. Am I going to go out and spend it all to the point that I have zero in my bank? No. I'll probably put 20% of it in a savings account and live off those reserves, right? So, what does that
Hmm.
20% look like? And if we start to actually translate our energy into dollars, you kind of look at it a lot different. And you're like, ooh, I'm not going to deplete myself down to zero. For what? No, I'm going to save some of that reserve. And that 20% becomes how I nourish myself. So if you took
Right.
20% of your week and said, I'm going to spend 20% of my week nourishing myself as an entrepreneur because that savings account is important to me, hell yeah, you would do it without question, right? Because 20% of your $1 million is a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So these practices, so what are we talking about? There's so many of like these individual practices. Like the one that I was thinking of is I have these morning practices that I do
Mhm.
every single morning. And I make space for those things because I know that they're important. So I wake up, I get my coffee, take my little dog outside, and we sit in the sun for like 5 minutes every morning.
Beautiful.
And it's really, that is for multiple reasons. For vitamin
Mhm.
D, for the vitamin D synthesis that my body doesn't do without sunlight. I am like a house plant. I need sun.
Just with
um,
more complicated emotions. I want that
right?
bumper sticker so bad.
But then I come upstairs and I sit with my little dog sipping my coffee, and I listen to affirmations. There's this channel that I follow that is such a positive influence in my life. And it's like a 15-minute positive affirmations to kind of set my brain in the direction of positive energy and move toward the things I want to create in this day.
Yeah.
These are daily practices that they're non-negotiable.
Yeah.
It's
And they
something
should
that
be,
I
right?
have to have space for, and if I don't, I will literally I'll look at my calendar and say, okay, is there anything that I can move here so that I can have my morning? Because my morning is where I set the tone for my day and how I move
Yeah.
through my day, you know? And that I think that's important.
You're so right. And it doesn't even matter. I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't do yoga or I don't meditate or I don't, right? There's like this weird, like, if I don't have spiritual practice, I'm not actually holding space. But even things like, let's just go literal business for a second. And I know you and I have
Mhm.
talked through a few of these before, but like even the Pomodoro timer, right?
Mhm.
That it's not actually great for your body to sit for long periods of time in that sedentary nature. Pomodoros, you can find the timers on YouTube, go out and search for one. It's either 40 minutes or 45 minutes of deep focus in your work and then 20 minutes of freedom. Go outside, go for a walk, go my one of my really dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Quaid, she has been doing her Pomodoro for a while. She loves to bead and make jewelry. So she'll go and she'll like stand at the counter and make jewelry for 20 minutes. And then she'll come back to her desk and she'll do another 40 to 45 minutes of productivity. So even recognizing how the human body needs to engage throughout the day instead of being in that steadfast sedentary nature of like, how
Yeah.
can you actually feed your being? And then the like decision making as an entrepreneur, especially when you're tired, doesn't go well. So like business tools like the Eisenhower matrix, like how to prioritize time blocking. Like I love this. You're like, oh, my non-negotiable time in the morning is between these hours. And that's when you do your thing. Like block it on your calendar. I don't take meetings
Exactly.
that time, right?
Don't take meetings during that time.
Right.
Exactly.
Because you're subconsciously bypassing, right? You're trading that currency of your 20%, you're giving that 20% away to somebody else. For what?
Mhm.
For what? Is it fruitful for you? Are you making another $200,000 on that time frame? Maybe not. But that's yours to decide. But but bypassing those times for the things that make you feel good is what's going to end up burning you out long term. So I
Yeah.
think anything, walking, if you love animals, like I had an entire whole ass farm here. I got tortoises and rabbits and chickens and
Mhm.
all the things. So sometimes I'm just like doing an animal visit because I love animals and that's therapeutic to me. So there's no cookie cutter way. It's just what makes you happy. Back to authenticity. The way that you do things in between your 45 minutes of work is up to you. What brings your soul joy? Because when you can come back to your desk in a heightened vibrational state, you're going to produce better results. Period.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh God, I love this conversation.
I
So
know.
let's talk a little bit about culture
Okay.
and success and how authenticity relates to that.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to look at it. If you are building a small business and it's just you and you might be expanding your team, you are the pulse of the organization. So you need to get really clear on who you are and what you do from an authentic lens because you'll naturally start to attract your tribe. And if you aren't clear on who you are through an authentic lens, you're going to attract mismatches because the universe doesn't truly know or spirit doesn't know what you're looking for. A lot of small business owners go into, I have an idea of what I want to do, but I've never actually thought through the strategy behind it. I just know I'm good at this thing and I'm going to go try to figure out how to make a business out of this thing, but it's not actually strategic. It's almost like tripping and falling into opportunities, which high five if the opportunities present themselves. I'm never going to say no to those. But as you start building your clientele, you're going to want to start to look at the strategy and the strategic nature behind your business and aligning that to who you are as an individual. Um,
Mhm.
that will naturally build your culture. Um, business success follows your vibrational frequency. That's period. Like when you start to tap into the same currency as money, money is naturally attracted to you, you become a money magnet, and that like natural attraction to money happens. You and I both know that there are cycles of business, right, Steph, where you're like, oh, wait a minute, energetically, somehow I might be blocking my
Yes.
frequency for receiving revenue, right? But it always comes back to
Yep.
us checking ourselves, doing the work, figuring out what's off in my
Yes.
vibrational frequency that's
Right.
pushing
Where am
that
I
money away.
resistant? Where am I contracting? Yes.
Exactly. And sometimes it's us compressing ourselves, or we're overspending from that energy bank, right? And that self-neglect piece feeds that. So there's a lot of ways. So you're, again, creating the pulse of your organization. So that's the number one. If you already are in a small business and you do have a team, you still have impact on that. But the more you grow, the more important it is to figure out what the identity of the organization is. Otherwise, your teams end up driving their own mini cultures within your culture. So if you lack authenticity as a leader in a business that has a small team, you'll start to see how people are making decisions that are actually out of alignment with who you are, which is a symptom of the fact that you have not created a clarity or understanding of the authenticity in the space of the business. So it's really good to self-check, figure out what I actually want the identity of this business in alignment with who I am is, and then disseminate that information. And anybody who doesn't make decisions within the context of your business, they got to go, because they will constantly be disruptors to the flow of your vibrational frequency.
God, I
There's
learned that.
yeah, you did. There's such rooted attachment into, I might be a little mad at myself because I made the wrong hiring decision, but that's a construct of the ego. And so the reality is they're either in alignment or they're not. Have a couple of conversations about what is in alignment and what is not in alignment. And when those true colors continue to show up, they got to go, because there's nothing in a small business that's worth your peace. Now, you have 50 plus employees. Let's talk about it. We'll go through human capital strategy. That's a whole nother conversation, because there's a lot of regulations there. But for the most part, it really comes foundationally from the leadership at the top, especially if it's rooted in divine feminine.
For sure. For sure. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so last question, Kaleigh. So, as you know, you've built all of this beautiful business and understanding how this world works and moving through businesses and supporting other people, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self when you
Oh,
first got started?
yeah. First of all, I love her. My 20-year-old self was wild and beautiful and also wildly misled. Um, learn, okay, so to my 20-year-old self, begin to understand that everything you believe about who you are is a program. You are programmed from the time you're a little to the time that you flee the nest, that you are a specific way. You're labeled as expressive, you're labeled as dramatic, you're labeled as loud, you're labeled as, right? And I had siblings growing up, and there was not a lot of us biologically, but there was a lot of us that my parents took in. And so I was constantly put in these boxes and labels of who I was as an individual. And
Yeah.
some of them aligned and some of them didn't, but it was what I learned to accept. And that unfold turned into a career of being labeled and just accepting the labels that other people said and never advocating for myself differently, because if it aligned with things that my parents said, I was like, oh yeah, you're probably right. I probably am loud. I probably am dramatic. Because that's what the programming that I was given. And so I would encourage my 20-year-old self to really evaluate what that programming is, what it means, how it looks, what are the things that are acceptable from my perspective, what are the things that are not acceptable from my perspective, and really learning to root in that. I there was a lot that I had to unpack. I had a father who wasn't around, and so I had like a worth wound. I didn't believe I was worthy of being chosen. And so that manifested in my career as never seeking growth opportunities because I never really believed that I was worthy of the growth opportunity. But again, it all came back to programming. No one taught
Yeah.
me how to think differently. And
Right.
that's one thing that I really would have dug in deeper had I been more consciously aware in my 20s. I had my first baby at 21, right? I was a baby having babies with no authentic identity at all. Now I'm stepping into the role of being a mom, which is what I wanted my whole life. But like, then everyone was like, oh, like you're a young mom, another label. You're a this, right? And it took me a long
Hmm.
time to realize that people have to label you because it's what creates comfort in their own mind.
Yes. Hmm.
So if my expression is beyond how they feel like they can express themselves, they have to label me as dramatic in order to be more comfortable with their level of expression, right?
Hmm.
And so I then started to look at people's labels and started to figure out that I was actually irritating their demons. And once I figured out that my level of participation in the world was going to irritate people's demons and I can make peace with that, I never looked back. Now I'm a grand disruptor and I get paid to do it. It's wild. I don't know how I tripped and fell into this, but yeah, so now I get paid to go disrupt organizations. I get paid to disrupt HR departments. I get paid to disrupt groupthink and like make people think differently. And so now I'm like, oh, I love this. But had I known at 20, where would I be at 38? But you know what? Spirit is everything in divine timing. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I learned what I was supposed to learn. But
Exactly.
yeah, definitely would have unpacked a lot of my 20-year-old selves and not been so boxed in by everyone or not allowed the boxes in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. How can people reach you, Katie?
Oh, I love this. Okay, in a couple of ways. Um, my HR organizational development business is called High Energy Consulting. So it's HIENERGY consulting.com. I
Mhm.
am on Instagram, high energy, HIENERGY. Hi, I'm sorry, high energy underscore Kaleigh, and that's KALEIGH, the complicated
Mhm.
spelling. High Energy Consulting LLC also has an Instagram. So if you're looking to follow my business page or what's going on there, that's available. Most of the stuff I'm doing personally, um, or even like lifing in life, that's on my personal Instagram page. But my website's always out there if I'm doing classes or postings or blogs or anything like that, or retreats. Sometimes I do retreats. That's all available on my website, and I update that pretty regularly. So yeah,
Awesome.
definitely available all over the place. I do own two women's leadership organizations as well. So if you're interested in what we're doing in leadership, the company's Athena Valley of the Sun. And then there's also an Instagram for Young Athenas. And that's the work I do with young women rooting themselves in their most authentic self. So that's an
Love
option
it.
out there as well.
Yep. Fantastic. Okay. Now, let's go to final thoughts. So, usually the last question is about let's inspire the people to be more healthy. This is Wellness Wednesdays with Stephanie. So,
Okay.
anything you'd like to share about holistic wellness, staying healthy,
Mhm.
inspiration?
Yeah. Find the things that feed your soul. Yeah, and do those things, right? Like my one of my best friends is fighting cancer right now, and he just kept saying to me on the phone like I really wish I could just go fishing. And I was like, "Wait, why are you not going fishing?" I like couldn't understand. And he was like, "Oh, I don't have the money for a fishing license." And I was like, "Isn't it like $40? Like let me just handle that." Right? Like where do I
Hmm.
sign the papers? And all of that. So find the things that bring your soul joy. And learn to integrate those into your business practices. I have 5 kids. Like I get it. I have 5 kids and 4 businesses. You're not always going to find time every day, but you can find time every day. You will make time for what you want to prioritize. So and it doesn't have to be, I think people think of self-care and they're like, oh, I need a 4 hour block to go to the spa. And it's like, no, you need 10-minute sun detox at 6 a.m. on the back patio. right? And sometimes
Yeah.
that's enough to rejuvenate your soul for a whole day. So if you can
Yeah.
invest 10 minutes a day in yourself, in something that brings your soul joy, absolutely do it. It will bring back abundance to you tenfold just because you're actually nourishing your
Mm.
being. So,
Love it. Yeah. Such beautiful magic. Thank you, Kaleigh. This has been
yeah,
so much fun.
thank you. Always a pleasure to spend time with you, Steph. Happy to be here.
Nice. Woohoo! Okay, well then, be blessed, be well, take care, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Absolutely.